welcome to episode 17 of Tintincast.
Fantastic.
And it's Tintin in Tibet this week, which is a very key, important one to a lot of people. And it's an interesting sort of chapter in Hersheys' life and in the life of Tintin, isn't it?
It is. It's also, it has quite a lot of personal significance for me as well, this one. We'll probably get into that a bit later.
Oh, I'd be interested to hear. But yeah, do you want to give us a little bit of story around where we are with Hergé and this book at the moment?
Yes, well, we're well through now. So by now, Hergé and Tintin are cultural icons, I suppose. Hergé's got the offers pouring in, and publications like Paris Match and Times Literary Supplement are all starting to write profiles of Hergé and his work. But Hergé has started to suffer from the night terrors, and he starts to have this recurring dream featuring bright white snow. So actually it probably makes sense if I read from Harry Thompson's great book, Tintin, Hergé and His Creation, because this actually describes one of the dreams that he has, which sort of sets the scene for Tintin in Tibet, really. So Hergé dreamed himself alone at home, the world covered in snow, with children playing outside. He goes out to throw snowballs at the children and they disappear. At once, his responsibilities feel lifted. Then he notices a rock in the snow. He approaches it and finds a tunnel, which he enters. At first, the going is easy, but gradually the ground begins to slope upwards more steeply. Large rocks begin to block the way. He has to heave these obstacles to one side to continue. Eventually, he finds himself climbing an iron ladder up a narrow vertical chimney through the rock. And at last there is light, a blinding white sky and a snowy landscape. And he tries to climb out of the crevice. However, he finds that the rungs of the ladder have bent over to form iron bars, blocking his way and sealing him in. The bars holding him prisoner have taken the shape of a church window. So this dream and the many others that he has around this time sort of reflect his state of mind at the time. He'd obviously had started this affair with the much younger Fanny Vlamink a year or so before this, and he'd fallen in love with her. But he was still living with his wife Germaine, who had played a massive part in supporting his career and the adventures of Tintin to date. So it seems that this combination of Catholic guilt and the Boy Scout ethos that Hergé had meant that he seems to have been absolutely mortified that he was in love with another woman. And this is all sort of now played out through his dreams, his nightmares, and now through Tintin in Tibet. So this book, this adventure, began to be serialized in Tintin magazine on the 17th of September, 1958.
Yeah, I mean, it's very telling that Hergé felt such horrendous remorse about what he was going through, because obviously he couldn't help it that he'd fallen in love with someone else. But he obviously felt terrible that he couldn't be honest with Germaine. He obviously felt that it was a massive betrayal on his part, and he'd wrestled with it for years, hadn't he? You know, the fact that he'd fallen for this other lady. And, poor Germaine, you feel sorry for her, but you also realise that Hergé was racked with guilt. I mean, if he's having these horrendous night terrors in which everything is white, he's clearly a very moral person, and that his little Jiminy Cricket is trying to tell him something.
Yes, I think that divorce at the time was seen as, it wasn't the thing to be seen to be doing in Belgium back in the 1950s. So there was sort of social pressures as well, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, the fact that he wanted to do something original with Tintin in Tibet. After the Red Sea Sharks, he was chatting to, I think, his publishers or one of his collaborators, and he just said, I just want to do something new. And he came up with some kind of story involving calculus again, didn't he, originally? And some kind of poison that I think Tintin or Haddock had taken, and then calculus's science found a cure for it or something like that. But he threw that all out, and he said, it's not happening. It's not pure enough a story. So he suddenly started to, after having all these dreams, he just wanted to create something that was very pure and white, and literally white, which kind of you know, in many ways it represents the moral sort of torpor that he was in.
And it's the first. Well, I mean, it's a very much simpler and I guess more linear tale than a lot of the more complicated storylines we've seen over the last few books. Fewer characters, no baddies. In fact, it's a story with almost kind of no villains and no violence. It's really the struggle of one man against the elements and against himself. I mean, this is the first book which features the name Tintin in the title since Tintin in America, and I don't think there's any mistake in that. It's very much centered around, you know, Tintin trying to sort of find himself as well.
Yeah, and it was going to be called something like the Yak's Nose or something, wasn't it? Because of the mountain range that, you know, the cow's nose, the yak's nose. They were trying to come up with various things. I think his publishers said, you've got to call it Tintin in Tibet, because it needs to be clear that this is a Tintin adventure. And also, I have to say, I love the font that he used there.
Yeah.
Because I've got a Danish version, and you can see, beautiful though it is, you can see how it misses out
The N.
It's a nice font. It's quite a nice font. It's quite Tintin-y, but compared to this,
Oh yes. Oh yeah.
it's not as nice. But I love the Danish. I love the way the font comes across. It's rather beautiful. There's actually quite a lot of dialogue in it for a very visual story, Tintin in Tibet. But it's quite funny dialogue. But it's either sort of chats or philosophy or.
I mean, it's full of religious imagery and premonitions and dreams and hallucination and superstition. So yeah, there's a real theme kind of running right through this book.
And I think because the last few outings have had, you know, everyone's been in it. The Thompsons are not in this one at all. I think it might be the first one since the early ones that you know, they're not in at all. They don't. Doesn't need them. It doesn't need calculus. It doesn't need anybody. They bring Haddock along for comic relief, because otherwise, you know, you've got to put Haddock in this situation, because he falls off ravines, he falls into the snow, he has all these accidents, he commits, you know, a sacrilegious act or two by crashing into some local totems and that kind of thing.
He is definitely the comic relief that this book kind of needs. He's the yin to the kind of quite depressing yang at times.
Well, that's it. It's the search for, I mean, you know, without giving too much away, I suppose I should say spoiler, but it's a search for Chang, his friend from the Blue Lotus. It's a search for his friend Chang, and you know, you don't see Chang for most of the book. It's the search for him. He thinks we think he's died in a plane crash, but Tintin's convinced that he hasn't, because he has a vision, which is very philosophical. You know, and it becomes about Tintin's obsession with finding Chang, and that's the point of the story. That's why they're following all the clues to just find Chang. And it's more about that's talks of Hersheys' mindset. I think he's trying to find some kind of meaning, and in the book it's to find this boy, but really it's a bit deeper than that, I think.
For me, this is the first book where Tintin is a real sort of three-dimensional character, because in this book he actually cries for the first time. The only character he ever cries about is Chang, when he hears that Chang might be lost in the Himalayas in this plane crash. That's never happened before. I mean, he kind of, certainly in the earlier books, Tintin sort of comes across as robo-reporter. It's this, it's kind of one-man Terminator or something.
Yeah, it is amazing, that panel on page 5 where you see Tintin with his head in his hands crying, going, my poor friend, you know. And then 2 panels later, no, he's not dead. he needs to like jeer us out of it, you know. And I like the constant, in the first 10 or so pages, as a constant joke that you hear the word Chang, and the first time is when Tintin is playing chess with Haddock, and Haddock is being so boring and not making a move that Tintin falls asleep, and suddenly has a dream about Chang and wakes up shouting Chang. There's that amazing half page where the whole room reacts, which is great.
Yeah,
and then there's a dog, you know, called Chang, and then someone sneezes Chang, and it just goes to show you that that's more about the obsession of that, when you're on an obsessive journey to find some kind of meaning. And the meaning in this book is that Tintin is going to find Chang, whereas in Hersheys' mind, he needs to find some kind of peace. And I suppose, Marcus, obviously you've studied Buddhism. Buddhism is a lot of the study of it is to find peace, inner peace.
I mean, I think that Hergé was definitely a spiritual person. He was sort of looking into various things around this time. I think Tibetan Buddhism was certainly one of them, and they had this sort of Dutch mystic hanging around their house, him and Germain as well. So he was sort of dipping into various things around this time. But it kind of seems that Chang almost represents some of this purity that we've been talking about, this kind of lost innocence or something that, both the Chang in the book and Hergé's relationship with the Zhang Zhongzhen, who, he hasn't seen this great Chinese artist as well, who's disappeared from his life many years earlier. Kind of idealized friendship.
Yeah, this is romanticized, isn't it? It's kind of it's the search for the self. Really, it's like some of the best stories, like Dances with Wolves, or basically pick a novel where the Heart of Darkness, something like that, where the protagonist's journey is to find someone, whereas actually it's to find the self and to find some kind of meaning in one's life. It's not, which is actually, it's like a Holy Grail story, isn't it? I think a lot of the time we think we're searching for something, but we're not. We're searching for a perspective on our own self.
Yeah.
And once you find that, you realize it's the Wizard of Oz thing. Again, you don't need to go further than your own backyard, because it's not lost. You just haven't figured it out that it's there.
Yes. It's sort of Tintin's Long Dark Night of the Soul or something, isn't it? Sort of journey into inner space or something.
That's it, yeah. But, and then still in the first 10 pages, you've got all these comedy moments. You've got Haddock riding a sacred cow. That's brilliant, under the back of the car.
I love him running up the Air India staircase on the wrong plane and just falling up. In fact, it's just the way it's done on page 9, where he kind of runs up these steps and Tintin's sort of looking around, sort of saying, "Where are you?" And he's obviously running up the wrong steps with no plane attached. And then it kind of cuts to the next frame where his nose is being bandaged on the flight.
And then you've got some lovely moments with the guy in Kathmandu, the airport manager, who's
with rubber band.
Little moment. It's such a lovely little moment of comedy. He's playing with a rubber band, and he's trying to tell Haddock what the journey's going to tell. Hits himself in the nose with the rubber band, and Haddock just goes ha ha ha, and then just stops and goes, "Oh, sorry."
Yeah, and if we're talking about Buddhism and karma,
yeah,
Haddock definitely gets his comeuppance in this book for all of these.
Oh, he does. He crashes into that same tradesman carrying that thing all the time. That's a recurring joke. He eats a fire jalapeno, a pepper. So it's got some just classic Haddock. Gets drunk, goes on a drunken march, singing the Grand Old Duke of York. Later on, he crosses the wrong bridge and you think he's going to fall in, and they're all waiting for him to fall in. And so Haddock's like, "Oh, here we go." And this usually ends with a splash. And then even Snowy's like commenting, "Is he going to fall in? Is he going to fall?" Ah, which is a lovely moment. So there's loads of slapstick with Haddock. He's brilliant in this. You need it, because the first half of the book is the getting there. You got these amazing 3 long panels here.
Yeah, Haddock's definitely fueled with whiskey in this particular book. He reminds me a bit of Popeye by this stage, that his, spinach, and in Haddock's case, it's whiskey is his kind of turbocharging juice. He just kind of like storms off ahead of everybody.
And then he runs out of steam, and then he has that amazing hallucination of calculus is there with and he's got a bunch of umbrellas.
Yeah, that's mad, isn't it?
Yeah. It reminds me of in Crab with the Golden Claws, when he sees Tintin as a bottle, and he's going to open or Tintin dreams that Haddock sees him as a bottle to be opened. They do some nice hallucinatory moment. And then this is, we're on page 16 now. It ends with them in the tent. He hears Bianca Castafiore on the radio, goes, "Oh my God, that woman!" Yeah,
he can't even escape her in the foothills of the Himalayas.
No, so it's great, even though they've obviously, the point of the story now, by the time they're reaching page 20 and so forth, is the mission. But you've managed to cram in, Hergé at this point, he's so confident with the characters, he's able to cram in everything you want to see, which is Haddock being ridiculous, Snowy getting drunk.
Well, there's a lot of again, religious imagery here with Snowy and the angel and the devil
Yeah,
bubbles popping up each side of his head when he's drinking the whiskey, and this kind of occurs later on in the book as well, with a bone involved.
I love that. It's a juicy bone, and I love it. It reminds me of, I can't remember. Is it might be Blue Lotus, but there's something where Snowy's he has to do something. Might have involved stealing a bone, and he imagines what Tintin is going to do to him when he gets back, and it's like, and it's like that. Snowy's like, I must. And to his credit, Snowy does. He goes and gets the Tibetan monks, and he says, well, he barks at them until they come with him. So he does blow it with the note that says help, by losing it. But Snowy actually really goes through it in this book. He falls off a cliff, falls into a ravine. Yes. He gets frozen nearly to death, but he manages to save Tintin's life again by barking into the night.
Yeah, they all nearly die in multiple ways.
They do. I was just looking at, on page 21, Haddock doing that, when you start running down a hill and he trips over the rock and you can't stop yourself. He's going, whoa, that's beautifully done, because you can see the weight. He's trying to hold himself back like this. Whoa.
Yeah, again, it's sort of a superstition thing. He's stopped by the Sherpas for trying to pass on the right-hand side of the stupa, which holds the relics of the Buddhas. And so he kind of tries to go off to the left and just kind of trips up and ends up running straight into a stupa at the bottom of the hill and destroying it.
And that brilliant final panel where the top of it lands on his rucksack and you realize how heavy it is,
That's it destroys his whiskey.
Yeah, I know. Oh, God, poor Haddock, but probably for the best, really. But I like the talk about, don't get your booze out because the Yeti likes it. The Yeti will steal your booze.
Yeah, and didn't see that one coming.
No, exactly. Well, the beer is called Chang, isn't it? There's this sort of running theme of Chang. Chang is the goal. It just reminds you, but again, there's some lovely, once they get to the snowy scenes, it's just beautifully done. They're trekking, they see there's footprints as on the cover.
And apparently Hergé invited Wavelmans back, who had been the scientific advisor on the Moon books, because I think he'd also written about rare animals, or animals that had been sighted but never been verified. So Wavelmans is back advising on the Yeti, and apparently Wavelman's wife Monique actually came up with a picture of the animal, which apparently some Sherpas had described how this Yeti might look.
I love the way the Yeti's portrayed in this, because he's a mystery, and then there's a point where in the snowstorm in the middle of the night you're aware that the Yeti is there. Then you don't quite see him. Hergé keeps him very secret for the whole book. Like, he runs away with a tent. You can see his feet running away. And then towards the end when they meet the Yeti, and it's like Ranko, the gorilla.
Yeah, I was going to say that, just like Ranko. Yeah.
He's a big, dumb, friendly beast who's just bark is worse than his bite, really. And it turns out that he's, when they find Chang, he's looked after Chang and kept him alive, but almost.
Yeah, he's just portrayed in a very sympathetic light, and in a way it goes some way to make up for Hergé's treatment of wildlife in previous books, particularly in Tintin in the Congo.
It does, yeah. It just goes around shooting things, yeah. But this, there's some amazing portrayals of just the framing of stuff and the scale of stuff that Hergé does in this. Like, even just shots like that of Haddock, you get a sense of scale from the mountains and the way they're looking up and down at things when they find the wreck, which is an incredible frame.
Yeah, it is.
The wrecked plane. Just the staging of it is so beautiful, because it could have just been white upon white, and it's not.
There are these frames on page 35 as well, I love, which there's like three quite similar drawings just next to each other. But when you look closely, it's actually the same mountains actually taken from three slightly different angles. You can see that the three frames actually sort of make up a wide panorama almost, and you can see that the characters aren't really traveling very far, and you see the immensity of the landscape that they're within there. I just think those are beautiful panels.
They are beautiful, yeah. Again, this is one that's full of key frameable panels, isn't it? I love.
Yeah, I mean, Hergé did, I think, always have an ambition to be a sort of serious artist, a painter, and some people say that he chose the pseudonym Hergé to write the Tintin adventures because he was almost saving the Georges Remy name for when he was a famous, respected, serious artist.
Do you know, that's fascinating that happens, because it happens so much with, I'm thinking of a couple of examples. George Lucas always said he wanted to get back to this kind of experimental cinema verite style of filmmaking, which he started out with. But I feel like he did that, and then he graduated. He did that. He made lots of interesting arty shorts, and then he made THX 1138, which is his first feature, which is a brilliant piece of dystopian sci-fi. You know, and obviously then he went on to make commercial stuff like American Graffiti, and then obviously Star Wars, and then he did Star Wars for the rest of his life, pretty much. But there's no shame in that, you know. No. There's no shame in artists who think, oh, I really wanted to do that. Maybe that's just the artistic temperament, you know. George Lucas wished he'd made loads of experimental films, but we all got Star Wars. You know, Hergé wishes he'd been a classical artist, but we all got Tintin. So, you know,
I just think that kind of wealth of the diversity of entertainment and culture out there. I was fortunate enough to work for a great guy when I was working in cultural development, who would sort of hold court about all of these different books he's read and films he'd seen in TV, and would often mention, Shostakovich and like Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the same sentence and things, and would just be kind of constantly jumping between sort of this, what we call sort of high art and low art, and just making no distinction, just and brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think that's,
absolutely, and I really hope that these are the times we live in. You know, there's a lot of snobbery. There's a lot of snobbery about genre and comics, and there's still a lot of snobbery about it. But to be honest, we live in a kind of world now where the art forms can quite happily intermingle. I love the fact that there's some real art in Tintin. I mean, you can't read these books and think this wasn't created by a very intelligent, observant artist who's also brilliant at storytelling for kids, you know?
Yeah, and almost by paring back to this very simple kind of landscape, he's able to, do more in many ways, because he's not trying to cram in all of these different, car chases and different locations and things like that. He gets all of the drama from this kind of wilderness. And by page 37, I think their Sherpa, Take, has deserted them, and it's just down to Tintin and Haddock and Snowy at this point. And I think even by this point, Haddock's wanting to be on his way as well. But I think, again, Tintin gets the old brandy out and gives him the sort of Wizard of Oz lion courage that he needs. I think he is quite like the lion in Wizard of Oz, isn't he?
Yeah. Haddock. Yeah. Again, they get to the end, and the lion's like, I wish I had courage. And then the wizard just says, but you've always had courage. I mean, look, you got here. So what I love about the Holy Grail story, because I think the Holy Grail was, invented by a 14th century French poet. I don't believe it was real, but I don't think it was supposed to be real. The Holy Grail, it's a mythical object that's meant to symbolize something you are looking for. But when you think that's the thing you're searching for, that's when you find the thing you're searching for. So I think in the story of the Fisher King, he reaches into the fire to get the Grail and burns his hand, and then this is the king, and then he's in his palace one day, and a fool comes into the castle and says, what can I get you? And the king says, I'm just really thirsty, can I have a drink? And the fool goes, oh yeah, here you go. And he looks at it and he goes, this is the Grail, how did you get the Grail? He goes, well, you just said you were thirsty. I think it's a beautiful tale, and I think it's like, that's what I love about Buddhism and anything like myths and storytelling. It's the search for, you think it's the search for something. It's the search for a MacGuffin. This is what Indiana Jones is always good at. It's the search for a MacGuffin. If I get that MacGuffin, then I've got the prize. I've got the thing to put in the museum. It's like, it's not that. It's the search for the self. It's the search for friendship. It's the search for meaning. Any journey is a search for meaning, because really the journey home is the big journey. The journey, I need to get back home.
I mean, I read this probably at the age of 8, 9, 10, something like that first. And then you actually introduced me to Hermann, Hesse and Siddhartha a few years later. And I kind of think about these books in kind of almost a similar sort of way.
Yeah, definitely. I know what you mean. Yeah. I read also Nulp is a beautiful one about the wandering man who wanders through different But again, yeah, Siddhartha's a great story in that, you know, it's about a young man who he defies his father to leave home. He wants to go off an adventure, but he realizes, I think he becomes the old wise man who tends the boat in the river. And the whole point is that he wants to become this, he wants to go on a journey, but in the end he becomes the wise old man. So he'll then inspire someone else to go off on this journey.
It's sort of the book that Hesse kind of writes time and time again with different names, but yes, it's a wonderful story.
It is, and it's like it's less important the aging process. Well, we're all going to get old, we're all going to die. It's more like stories like that are all, well, we'll always, whatever stage of the world the life we're at, it's like a river. The river changes and the river always stays the same. It depends where you are in your thinking. God, we're getting deep in this one, aren't we? But it is
I know, and we're about to approach page 40, which is kind of a pivotal page in the book, really, isn't it?
I love it. I love that because, yeah, you know, Tintin again, he says Haddock is in mortal peril, and Tintin's like, well, we'll die together.
Yeah.
You know, and Haddock's like, no, I'll cut the rope and I'll drop and I'll save you. And he's like, no, you won't. We'll die together, which is an incredible thing to say to your mate, you know.
Yeah, I mean, again, just like Tintin crying in the early parts of this book, you know, whenever you see him about to be, you know, eaten by a crocodile or whatever in the past books, he doesn't look as though he's in mortal terror. It looks as though he's, you know, running away or doing whatever he's doing. In this book, he says, I can feel my strength going and the cold is paralyzing me. The rope is cutting deeper into my flesh. Poor captain, he clearly doesn't realize.
It's heavy, isn't it? It's really, like you'd say, you know, it's a cartoon book for kids, it's a comic book for kids, but that doesn't mean it can't have some depth to it. And I think the fact that, you know, we're now 21 books in and we've loved going on these adventures with Tintin, he's like you say, he's a blank slate, he's a Luke Skywalker character. I think there comes a point where in the hero's journey, and this seems like, I think Joseph Campbell would have probably loved Tintin in Tibet, you know, he maybe read it and he talked about it, but it's a hero's journey, and you actually, because you've been through all these adventures with Tintin, by now you know you love Tintin. You are Tintin. He's a hero. He's the guy you're on the journey with. But in this one, he's an interesting character. You're like, he's got depth. He feels things. He's facing mortality. He's risking his life for his friends. He's upset that his friend might be dead. It's like that makes him way more interesting as a character.
And I love the way that the captain sort of stays in character, even when he's about to, you know, cut the rope with the penknife. He says, cast off the moorings.
Yes, cast off moorings. And then he goes, thundering typhoons, I can't get the confounded blade open.
So it is, in fact, his clumsiness that saves him. Of course it is.
Yeah, it's that irony, isn't it? And I love it. But I love the fact that the Sherpa comes back and then it's like a few moments later, they're all fine. Let's get past that bit. But then, you've got this bit we talked about with the monks and, you know, blessed lightning ascending into the air, having a vision. I love the fact that they actually let him ascend into the air.
This is the bit that when I started reading this again, I mean, you know that I'm a practicing Buddhist and have been for many years. And I mean, this is probably the first time that I ever encountered Tibetan monks in any kind of thing that I was kind of watching or reading. And I'm looking back on this, I just started to wonder how much of that can be traced back to this particular book, and actually looking at the monastery that they go to with the monks with the yellow hats. I hadn't realized, but that the yellow hats are sometimes called Gluckpa, and there are 4 schools of Tibetan Buddhism, and one of them is Gluckpa, and this is Gluckpa, and this is the school that I'm in, actually, funnily enough, because it's actually quite a small school compared to the rest of Tibetan Buddhism, but it's the one that I ended up in, and it's His Holiness the Dalai Lama's school as well. And actually, if you look at the abbot of the monastery as he's drawn here, I think he's drawn to resemble the 13th Dalai Lama. He actually has quite a look of the 13th Dalai Lama, the Dalai Lama before the current Dalai Lama. And blessed light, as you say, he's actually levitating and having this vision of Tintin as pure of heart, collapsed in the snow with his white dog. And, you know, who wouldn't want to levitate? So this is probably psychologically something that just kind of my first connection with Buddhism. Now, when I actually experienced kind of Buddhism one-to-one, and my first introduction to Buddhism in person was quite a different experience, because I went to the Buddhist Society in Victoria in London when I was 22, and I walked in, and the first Lama I encountered wasn't like a Tibetan Lama in robes and like the yellow hat. It was this Yorkshireman called Brian Appleyard, short sleeves and slacks. And he was like particularly down to earth and talked about things like the Four Noble Truths. And yeah, he was a wonderful man and kind of started me on my journey. But yeah, I think maybe Tintin had already started me on the journey like a decade earlier or so. So yeah,
that's. I mean, it's not to be sniffed at, because a lot of these things are rooted in childhood, because we're so, or when we're very young, because we're so susceptible to stuff. We're so suggestible, more like, to new ideas and stuff. And I think I can trace back most of the stuff I'm currently obsessed with, or have been all my life, to being a kid. Because it's something that just sparked something off in your head, whether it's nature or religion or anything like that. But what I love about Buddhism particularly is it's about other people are more important, but the key to them is the self. I think that's basically the sort of central tenet, isn't it? That it's not, there's a line in Fish Called Wanda when she says to Kevin Kline, the central message of Buddhism is not every man for himself. And I think that sometimes people think that I'm the most important person in the world. It's like, no, you're not. The whole rest of the world is the most important thing. It's how you perceive them.
That's right. It's only you that can do anything about it. It's like they're really important, but you're the only one who can do anything about it.
That's right. And through the understanding of the self, not the obsession of the self and the ego and the narcissism that people have. Not that. It's you are the window to the world. And I always loved that in journeys, and also loved the whole in journeying, don't become, in chasing monsters and fighting monsters, be careful you don't become a monster. I always love stories like that.
It's funny because I was having a conversation the other day with the head nun down at the Leith Buddhist Centre down the road from here, wonderful lady called Annie Rinchin-Kandro, and she was telling me that she was a big Tintin fan, and she used to wear a Tintin in Tibet watch, I think, with her robes, actually. So, and there's also this wonderful picture of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama actually sitting there reading Tintin in Tibet, which just is brilliant because it just brings the whole thing full circle.
Yeah, you told me about that, and I looked it up, and it's beautiful. It's a lovely. That's what I love about the way this series has been received that we're doing, because we've done it for ourselves, because we wanted to reread the Tintin books and check in every week and have a chat and all that, because we've been friends since the dawn of time.
Yeah.
Or 40 years, whatever, it seems like the dawn of time for us. But I love the fact that other people have responded to it because of their attitude to Tintin and their own experience of Tintin, and the fact that they've loved him since they were kids. And they've all got the different interpretation stuff, but
yeah, all finding different things in it.
Yeah, that's what I love about it. And there's no snobbery. Again, it's what I love about our generation. I'm talking about the Generation X, I think we're referred to as kids that were born in the 70s and probably 80s as well, is that we've now grown up and the geeks have inherited the earth. So we're now saying it's okay to like comic books. It's okay to like all this stuff, sci-fi, fantasy, cartoons, whatever. It's as valid as, like you're saying, Shostakovich, or, if you wanted to stick a cartoon on or watch, I'm watching the Star Wars, the Clone Wars at the moment, but I also watched some Kurosawa the other day, or a really good 70s horror film. It's like, it's all valid, it's all art, it's all created by someone for entertainment. Don't be a snob about it,
And that's the emptiness of Tintin books, folks.
Yeah, it's a shameless, that people talk about guilty pleasures. There is no guilt. Just enjoy what you enjoy, Tintin or Shakespeare, whatever. But I think people talk about Tintin in Tibet as Hersheys' masterpiece. I think he's done a few masterpieces, but I think Tintin in Tibet, it's one of those pivotal moments. I think Blue Lotus is one, and I think one of his critics said their favorites are Blue Lotus and Tintin in Tibet, and it's great that Chang's in both of them. Because it's got that mysticism to it, and it's got that beautiful, obviously they're beautifully drawn, it's got these fantastic colors in it. As soon as they get off the mountain and they go to the monastery, everything's, it's rather fantastic that we're both wearing our yellow t-shirts today. Yours is particularly apt, mine is an ET t-shirt. But speaking of things that you loved when you were 8 years old and have never stopped thinking about since, But I love the fact that the Buddhists generally wear bright colors and positive colors, and lots of yellows and oranges. The Buddhist center I've been to in Yorkshire, I went to a couple of meditation meetings. I'm not a Buddhist, but I loved going, because we were at a stage, me and Vicky, where we needed to just sort of unwind a bit, and then there were these sessions. So we went to, and they're wearing these beautiful orange robes, and it's quite a feast for the eyes, isn't it?
It is. In fact, I mean, there's that wonderful moment as well where Haddock's sort of woken up in the monastery having been saved, and the abbot of the monastery has granted Tintin this audience, and then Haddock kind of bursts in halfway through asking for a shoehorn.
Yeah, I just love it. I love what a grumpy old man Haddock is. Wherever he is, he's at a Buddhist monastery, which is all about peace and understanding and harmony. Yeah. He's like, worst of all, Grand Mufti, the Yeti pinched a bottle of whiskey. Only just opened, and the Grand Mufti's like, yes, that must be terrible. Yeah.
And the abbot eventually sort of prostrates in front of Tintin and the captain, because they've been pure of heart, and they've seen through this sort of hero's quest against all odds and against his own advice. And I love the way he christens the captain Rumbling Thunder.
Yeah, it's brilliant, very apt. And then I love the last 10 pages, which is the final quest. Because it's not, they've got away from all the snow. The snow is now in the distance. It's on the caps of the mountains behind them, and now they're in rocks, which is where the book started, which is Snowy complaining about going up and down rocks, and they're in the rocky bit now, which is it's like the final quest. It's like the final level, the big boss level. Spot the Yeti, and they spot where the cave is, where Chang might be. And it's visually, it's very different. There's no snow.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it almost, you say sort of levels, but it does feel almost like that kind of computer adventure, that suddenly there's this kind of final terrain that they have to fight in. What in this case, it's not a fight. It's like it's a challenge against the elements.
Well, it's like Tomb Raider. It's suddenly you're in a different terrain.
Donkey Kong.
Yeah, at least the Yeti's not throwing barrels down at them. That would be funny. But they don't get to Chang until page 56. I mean, you're like 6 pages off the end, and that's the way it should be. It's that he is the goal in a way, behind Chang. But the journey was the most important thing, because if we want to get deep about it, I think Haddock and Tintin nearly died. Snowy, let's not forget Snowy. They all saved each other's lives at various points. They learned the value of friendship and all that. And it's actually it's got some depth in it. So when he does meet Chang, it's this conclusion of the quest, and then Chang tells his little story about what happened to him, which is rather beautiful. And then you've got these lovely, colourful ending with the monks appearing with all their instruments.
Yeah, it really is a nice final act, isn't it?
Just look at those penultimate 2 pages.
Yeah,
it's so beautiful. You've got the rocky mountain, and the Yeti runs off, and then you've got this beautiful page here where it's just yellow, and it's like the sun has come out on the mountaintop, Yes. And then that final sad page where they're talking about how the Yeti might have had a human soul.
And the beautiful last frame with the Yeti just watching the caravan disappear into the horizon,
back to his lonely life and stuff. So it is again quite a spiritual. It's quite a spiritual, very, very far from Tintin in the Congo. That should be by now. Yeah.
So let's talk balls.
I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I think it's a solid 7 for this one.
I think it is. There's been a few recently, but I'm going to have to agree with you.
Yeah, I think it's it's just beautiful. It's perfect. I think it's perfect. I think it's like the Calculus Affair, but completely different story.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of all the ones we've given 7 to, and I think for me it was Secret of the Unicorn, Red Rackham's Treasure, the Moon ones, the Calculus Affair, and Tintin in Tibet. So I've given like half a dozen 7s. I don't just give 7s out, to all of them willy-nilly. No, I've given quite a few 5s and 6s, but I don't think you can say this is any less than a 7. I think it's just, and you think about it after you've read it too.
Yes, you do.
You know? So what's happening with poor Hergé at this point then?
Poor Hergé. Well, the serialization of Tintin in Tibet comes to an end on the 25th of November 1959, so we're nearly through the 50s. It's published in French in book format by Casterman in 1960, and then in English by Methuen in 1962. And during the serialization of this adventure, Hergé went to see Swiss psychoanalyst Professor Ricklin, who was a protege of Carl Jung. And right. Ricklin would analyze Hergé's white nightmares, basically. He told Hergé that Hergé had to learn that good and evil coexist, that there can't be one without the other, and that he must destroy what he called the white demon of purity inside him. So Ricklin also tells Hergé, I don't want to discourage you, but you will never finish your life's work. In your place, I would just stop working now. And this is the middle of Tintin in Tibet, and Hergé gets told this by his psychoanalyst. And he refuses to stop work on Tintin. And it's almost like if he can't remain loyal to Germain, at least he can be loyal to Tintin and finish the adventures. And even though by now the work on Tintin seems to have become a bit of a chore for Hergé, each book is taking a little bit longer to finish by this stage. But he seems in this case to have used Tintin in Tibet as a way of, working through his some of his own issues. So this visit to Ricklin does seem to have persuaded Hergé to accept that he's not perfect. And Hergé decides that he does have to separate from Germain, although the couple remained living together for quite a while after this and started to have increasingly acrimonious fights. By autumn 1959, Hergé's developed a duodenal ulcer due to the stress, but it isn't till February 1960 that he finally moves out of his home with Germain and takes up residence in the Hotel Brussels. And remember, by this time, he'd already been in a relationship with the now 26-year-old Fanny for 4 years. And because of the stigma of divorce in Belgium at the time, Germain and Hergé actually decide to keep their separation quiet, certainly keep it out of the press, and only kind of close friends sort of knew what was happening. And Germain would continue to accompany Hergé to public events for the next 17 years as his wife, until the couple finally divorced. Anyway, the very personal nature of this book means that it actually becomes Hergé's favorite in the entire series, and it seems to have been quite cathartic for him. And I think we'll see next week that some of that catharsis may be reflected in the Castafiore Emerald.
Yeah, that's a fun one, isn't it? Castafiore Emerald. I think it's the B side of Tintin in Tibet. It's a very fun adventure. Again, I don't remember everything about it, so I'm looking forward to reading that one. But Tintin in Tibet, I think I like the Black Island, like the Moon ones. I'd read it a lot. And I wonder, the ones I've read a lot, probably because they were my favorites, I kept going back to them. Hence, they get 7s, because they're clearly, I'm quite biased. They're ones that, you read a comic book, you read it several times if you love it, don't you?
You can tell the podcasts that are going to be 7s because they end up lasting twice as long as all the other ones.
You can tell. And then my sister Emmy, she's always like, I watch them and I can guess. At some point, I'm like, I bet this is a 7 or a 6, or you can tell. If I suddenly said at the end of this one, after all the praise, well, it's a 4. What? But yeah, thanks very much for all your lovely comments and stuff on the YouTube. It's really nice to read them, and it's nice to see the viewing figures are doing well. And
it makes it all really worthwhile. And we're both really enjoying the whole thing.
We are. So, keep watching, watch the ones you haven't watched, read the books again, follow us on Twitter, and we'll see you next week for Castafiore Emerald.
Catch you there.